Arknights!
Welcome. In this video, the event, Stultifera Navis, will be summarized. Throughout the video, there will be spoilers for the story of Arknights. If you don't want to be spoiled, please go and play the game. Khaliset meets with Saint Carmen in Iberia, where the two reflect on language, knowledge, and the limits of human understanding. The saint, who has lived 123 years, has asked Khaliset 123 questions, and drops a rock into a coastal well, then listens to the silence before it splashes. He speaks of Iberia's fallen glory, the destruction brought by the profound silence, and the threat of the seaborn lurking beyond what mankind knows. He questions whether Khaliset belongs to the human world or to something far older and darker. Khaliset presses him to accept outside help against the seaborn threat, but the elder insists on proof before Iberia places its trust in anyone. Their conversation ends on an uneasy note, with the fate of Terran civilization hanging in the balance. Elsewhere in the coastal town of Grand Faro, several outsiders arrive and stir quiet tension among the locals. A band called Alive Until Sunset, AUS, explores the town seeking creative inspiration near the unsettling shore. Elysium waits in a chapel for a group that is already overdue. A young Aegir named Jordi tends the chapel and navigates the suspicion his heritage draws from the Inquisition-wary townspeople. The mayor, Thiago, urges Jordi to keep his distance from strangers, fearing Inquisition reprisal. Meanwhile, Jordi privately wrestles with a disturbing encounter he witnessed near the sea, and with the quiet growing dread that something terrible is approaching. Elysium reunites with Alti of Alive Until Sunset in the chapel, and the two await Khaliset's arrival as tension builds across Grand Faro. A dead sea terror appears in the town plaza, drawing frightened crowds and unsettling the locals, while Mayor Thiago insists on keeping the Inquisition out of it. A rogue cultist named Juan, wounded after one of his kin is killed by an Aegir, is treated by Jordi before dying and being carried off by sea terrors. Meanwhile, Cal finally arrives at the chapel and meets privately with Alti, revealing that the seaborne threat is far graver than most nations realize. She tasks Elysium with tailing Amaia and Thiago while she briefs Alti on the dire situation facing Iberia. In a hidden pub, Amaia comes face to face with a mysterious abyssal hunter who reveals that the Bishop of Salviento is dead. The two cultists carrying the body of the slain sea terror enter the chapel, where Khaliset and Alti watch as one of them, Juan, performs a ritual to merge with his fallen kin. This act is a form of assimilation, a grim method of fusing two bodies into one, which causes Juan to convulse violently on the chapel floor. Before the process can complete, the Inquisition Saint Carmen storms in and cuts Juan down, condemning the cultists for desecrating a sacred place. The surviving cultist panics over Juan's fate and demands to know how an Inquisitor slipped past their guard. Saint Carmen presses him for answers, questioning why the Church of the Deep has chosen such a small and unremarkable town as its next target after Salviento. The confrontation leaves the chapel thick with the threat of further violence, and the full reach of the Church of the Deep's influence becomes impossible to ignore. Thiago urges Jordi to flee Grand Faro before the Inquisition arrives, warning that the Aegir are always the first to be targeted and that none who are taken ever return. Jordi hesitates, unwilling to abandon the only home he's ever known, and instead asks to visit the sea one last time. At the shoreline, Thiago opens up about the town's painful history, recounting how 2 generations of Grand Faro poured their lives into a dream of relighting the Eye of Iberia and rebuilding the coast into a fortress. It reveals that Jordi's parents volunteered for the final attempt to reach the lighthouse, sailing out and never returning. The Inquisition then crushed what remained of that dream, arresting the Aegir workers on suspicion of being Church of the Deep spies. Thiago pleads with Jordi to leave and find better life elsewhere, insisting there is nothing left in Grand Faro worth staying for. Elsewhere, Dan and Aya encounter Gladia, Scotty, and a silent and unsettled specter near the coast, and the groups briefly introduce themselves as distant kin of the sea. Spectre suddenly grows still and listens to something no one else can hear, identifying it as music of the sea and the crying of the sea's children. Scotty catches the scent of sea terrors nearby and realizes the town is under attack. Back in the plaza, St. Carmen drags 2 cultist prisoners through the square and confronts a pair of Church of the Deep members who emerge from hiding. He tells them they have no chance of defeating him and demands to know what they are scheming on the shore. The standoff grows tense as Carmen presses for answers about the Church of the Deep's true intentions in Grand Faro. Sea terrors flood the streets of Grand Faro, sending the townspeople into a panic before Gladia cuts one down and orders Scotty and Spectre to handle the rest while she searches for Calicut. Inside the chapel, Cal and Alti speak calmly about the situation, with Alti agreeing that AUS will hold position and help evacuate the Iberians if the Abyssal Hunters fail. Elysium tracks down a group of cultists and overhears them discussing the proximity to the Eye of Iberia before they spot him and give chase. After losing them, he finds their hidden base inside a restaurant just 2 blocks from the chapel, where the remaining cultists burn their documents before fleeing. Elysium rushes to save what he can from the fire and recovers partial blueprints, historical records, and a drawing of the town's statue. Before he can report his findings, Alpianus appears and destroys his communicator, cutting off his connection to Cal. Meanwhile, Amaya confronts Alpianus directly, revealing she knows his name and suggesting their goals are aligned. Though he remains cold and threatening throughout the exchange, Alpianus admits he went into exile to pursue a goal shared by all Aegir, and warns Amaya to stay away from Gladia, Scotty, and Spectre, insisting that even on land, the 3 of them could level the town without effort. He tells her he needs the ship docked at Grand Faro and must reach it before Gladia, fearing what she might do if she returns to the Aegir without the full picture. In the town square, Gladia introduces herself to St. Carmen as the Technology Council and Chief Designer of Warfare of Aegir, and the 2 exchange a tense but measured conversation about the Eye of Iberia. Carmen tells her the Eye is the only way to locate the Stultifera, and the open ocean and the Inquisition's help is essential to reaching it. Gladia listens but remains non-committal, insisting she will discuss further only after confirming Cal is safe. Gladia reunites with Cal in the chapel, and the 2 confirm their temporary alliance between Aegir and Iberia before preparing to move out against the cultists. Calicut receives a broken transmission from Elysium just before Alpianus destroys his communicator, signaling that he's in danger. In the streets, Scotty and Spectre cut down sea terrors while Spectre drifts in and out of lucidity, drawn by the scent of the ocean and murmuring about finding her way home. Frost wanders through the chaos unharmed, her music somehow keeping these sea terrors at bay, and briefly encounters Spectre before urging her to sing and rediscover herself. Meanwhile, Elysium is cornered by Alpianus, who demands the recovered documents be destroyed and warns an Aegirian that the Abyssal Hunters must not return to Aegir yet, as doing so will only accelerate its destruction. St. Carmen interrogates a wounded cultist and realizes the Church of the Deep has been targeting Grand Faro because of Iberia's legendary lighthouses. Part of the Eye of Iberia is still operational here. As Carmen closes in on the truth, a dying sea terror begins emitting a strange luminescent substance, and Calicut shouts a warning before summoning Monster and ordering it to unleash a meltdown to contain the threat. Back in the streets, Spectre sings an old Aegirian lament that Frost dismisses as belonging to a sorrowful and stagnant past, though she encourages Spectre to keep singing and face her destiny. Spectre continues alone, her quiet voice drifting through the ruined streets, until Amaya approaches and addresses her by her true name, Laruentia. The moment signals that Amaya knows far more about Spectre and her past than anyone in Grand Faro should. An inquisitor named Irene receives final instructions from her superior before being cleared to join the mission, having reaffirmed her commitment to the Inquisition's cause. Monster destroys a sea terror emitting the Nether Sea brand, prompting a tense exchange between Gladia and St. Carmen about the spreading luminescent phenomena and its connection to the Seaborn's evolution. Calicut breaks away to rescue Elysium, while Gladia promises to clear out the remaining threats in 10 minutes before meeting Carmen to plan their approach to their lighthouse. In town, fearful residents trap Thiago and Jordi inside their home, intending to hand Jordi over to the Inquisition as proof of their innocence. Thiago helps Jordi escape across rooftops and urges him to flee north towards a messenger station, then stays behind to hold off their pursuers alone. He and a pursuing townsperson exchange blows in the street while sea terrors rush past them, entirely unbothered, the two men looking absurd amid the chaos. Alpianus intercepts Jordi outside of town, claiming to need him as a descendant of someone called Briogan, and insisting he's the key to Aegir's salvation. Before Alpianus can force the issue, Elysium throws a smoke grenade and pulls Jordi away to safety, with a High Inquisitor moving in to detain Alpianus in the confusion. Back with Amaya and Spectre, Amaya promises to tell Spectre the truth once her mind is her own again before vanishing before Scotty can intervene. Elysium finds Jordi shaken and reluctant to leave and pushes back on his vague sense of duty, pointing out that ordinary people have no role to play in what's unfolding. Jordi insists there's something left for him to do, unwilling to let his farewell to Grand Faro be shaped by fear and chaos rather than his own choice. The cultist rearguard orders the remaining sea terrors to find Amaya and delay the Abyssal Hunters as their last of their numbers hold the line. Alpianus escapes the High Inquisitor Dario and Irene by using sea terrors as a distraction, declaring Iberia unqualified before fleeing into the contaminated Earth. St. Carmen and Dario survey the spreading Nethersea brand and realize Grand Faro has not merely been infected by the Church of the Deep, but also has fallen to it entirely. Elysium and Jordi are cornered by a nest of rapidly multiplying sea terrors before Cal arrives with Monster and burns out both the creatures and the Nethersea brand without needing Aegir technology. Carmen assigns Dario and Irene the task of escorting the Abyssal Hunters to the last surviving lighthouse, 50 nautical miles from Grand Faro's coast, and formally commissions the mission to reclaim the Eye of Iberia. AUS waits in the chapel and quietly debates why Calicut has involved them, with Aya suspecting she changed her plans at some point along the way. The Abyssal Hunters and the Inquisition convene in the town square, built by Aegir architect Briogan, for a tense but decisive conference. Calicut confronts both sides when the meeting threatens to collapse under old grievances, warning that further delay will render the Abyssal Hunter sacrifices meaningless. Carmen concedes that point and formally agrees to full cooperation in locating the Stultifera Navis, the lost golden dreadnought that has been missing for over 60 years but is believed to still be afloat. Gladia accepts the alliance and Carmen orders warships to Grand Faro immediately to secure a sea route to the Eye of Iberia. Jordi arrives with Elysium and steps forward before the assembled Inquisitors, revealing that his parents were lighthouse technicians who gave their lives for the Eye and that he wants to see it for himself. Dario moves to detain him, but Calicut reveals he may be a descendant of Briogan, shifting the room's attention entirely. Carmen orders Irene to take Jordi with the expedition rather than imprison him, and the Alliance sets out with the Eye of Iberia as their destination. Amaya says goodbye to Thiago, telling him that Jordi has willingly placed himself in the Inquisition's hands and that nothing can be done to stop it. She urges Thiago to notice that, unlike past Inquisition raids, the Sea Terror invasion has brought no scheming or senseless slaughter, and that a strange stillness has fallen over Grand Faro. The expedition sets sail for the Eye of Iberia with Dario, Irene, Jordi, and the 3 Abyssal Hunters aboard, fighting off waves of sea terrors as they go. Gladia dives into the sea to clear a path, moving faster underwater than anyone on the ship can follow, while Jordi steers and Irene defends the vessel. When they arrive, the lighthouse looms out of the darkness like a colossus hidden in the sky, and both Dario and Irene are struck silent by the sight of something they have only ever seen in documents. Calicut and Carmen remain behind in Grand Faro, beginning the long work of cleaning up the town and preparing Iberia for the broader war to come. The group makes landfall on the reef, which is coated in Nethersea brand and littered with the rotten remnants of past failed expeditions. Gladia notes that the Eye of Iberia is built entirely from Aegir technology, and Spectre wonders aloud what the lighthouse has been waiting for in the empty sea. A large nest of sea terrors defends the lighthouse, and Gladia and Scotty engage them while Geordi searches for his parents' research notes for a way to find and activate the control panels still responding outside. Dario reminds Irene to reassess everything she knows about the Hunters and the Seaborn, pushing her to make her own judgments rather than rely on old prejudices. Geordi stands before the lighthouse and realizes his parents once stood in the very place, and that Thiago was right to call them heroes. As the group fights to open the Eye of Iberia, a mysterious armored figure emerges from the water on a hippocampus-like mount. The figure is revealed to be the Last Knight, a half-seaborn warrior from Casimir's who can no longer speak clearly but is fixated on destroying the lighthouse, hurling himself at its walls with a warped spear. Dario holds the knight off outside while Irene and Geordi race to the top of the tower, finding the main control panel still responsive thanks to the notes Geordi's parents left behind. Spectre grows clearer-headed near the sea and intercepts the Last Knight, knocking him down before engaging him in a strange, almost mournful dance as he rises again and continues toward the lighthouse. Back in Gran Faro, Carmen asks Calicet why she condemned Geordi to danger by claiming he is Briogan's descendant when the Inquisition never would have overlooked such a vital clue. Dario, grief-stricken at seeing Iberian weapons scattered across the reef from 17 failed expeditions, fires his hand cannon into sea terrors and reclaims the reef in the name of those who died trying to reach the place. Inside the control room, Geordi works through his parents' research notes to restart the lighthouse's power system while the tower shakes from the Last Knight's assault outside. Irene steadies herself and orders Geordi to keep moving forward, accepting that reinforcements arriving under these conditions would only mean more casualties. Dario and Spectre continue to hold the Last Knight at bay, with Spectre addressing him softly in Aegirian and lamenting that language can no longer reach him through his madness. Gladia and Scotty fight off the remaining sea terrors nearby while Spectre remains behind, acting on her own instincts rather than the captain's orders. In Gran Faro, Calicet and Carmen continue their quiet conversation, the weight of everything set in motion hanging over them. Meanwhile, on Rhodes Island, Grani reads a line copied into a bookmark inside the novel Maria's sister once gave her, unaware of how closely it echoes what is unfolding far away at the edge of the sea. Geordi and Irene push deeper into the Eye of Iberia, while sea terrors flood the tower and the Nethersea brand crawls up through the walls and floors. Geordi discovers that the lighthouse's signal receiving equipment has been active for decades and that a ship has been continuously transmitting coordinates to it throughout all those years. Gladia identifies the signal as the Stultifera Navis, still afloat and held in place by aberrant ocean currents, with Seaborn swarming around it. Dario orders Irene to go with the Hunters and become Iberia's eyes on the open sea, choosing the mission over his own safety. Gladia, Scotty, Spectre, and Irene board the ship and depart for the Stultifera, while Dario and Geordi remain behind at the lighthouse. Back in Gran Faro, Carmen's informant reveals that the Nethersea brand has spread in a perfect circle 50 kilometers wide around the town, and that it is not the town that has been surrounded, but the Inquisition itself. Thiago meets with a Church of the Deep cultist and negotiates a desperate alliance, looking for a way to protect Gran Faro from the Inquisition's crackdown. Elysium, who's been following Thiago, is discovered by sea terrors and steps out of hiding to face the cultists directly. At the lighthouse, Geordi chooses to stay behind with Dario rather than board the ship, feeling that his purpose lies in the lighthouse rather than the voyage. Dario is frank with him, acknowledging that staying likely means death as the Nethersea brand consumes the coastline and reinforcements may not arrive on time. Rather than despair, Dario sends Geordi to activate the lighthouse's dormant defenses and then turns to face the encroaching sea terrors alone, with only his lantern and hand cannon. Gladia, meanwhile, stands at the bow of the departing ship and quietly acknowledges the rough patch of skin on her neck, steeling herself for the journey home. The Abyssal Hunters and Irene reach the Stultifera Navis and board the legendary ship, finding it eerily pristine after 60 years adrift, its corridors untouched by dust and its floorboards still gleaming. Bipedal Seaborn attacks on deck before fleeing into the cabin, and the group splits up to pursue it, with Gladia heading below and Spectre accompanying Irene and Scotty through the golden corridors. Back in Gran Faro, Frost steps forward and uses her music to hold the sea terrors at bay, her deep connection to the sea making the creatures hesitate and circle her in confusion rather than attack. Carmen and Calicut take advantage of the opening to plan their push towards the Eye of Iberia, agreeing to leave Gran Faro in the hands of the Penal Battalion rather than allowing further delay. Amaya and Alpianus move toward the Stultifera together, with Amaya hinting that she understands things beyond the limits of human thought. The Seaborn, like heralds, come to understand truths that ordinary minds cannot reach. Gladia pauses at the bow of the ship and holds the hands of both Scotty and Spectre before solemnly welcoming her hunters home. The floor of the Stultifera collapses beneath Irene, Scotty, and Spectre, dropping them into the ship's ornate ballroom where a broken mirror hangs against a wall. A young Seaborn emerges from the shadows behind the mirror and addresses Spectre by a distorted version of her true name, Laurentia, recognizing her from some shared past. Spectre stares at the mirror and the Seaborn, and in that moment something shifts within her as her mind clears and her tone changes entirely. She acknowledges her own name with full clarity for the first time, reading it off a scroll tied to her weapon and remarking that she could still remember where she was born when she wrote it. Scotty watches in astonishment as Spectre, lucid and composed, addresses the Seaborn directly before declaring that it is time for it to sleep. The Seaborn screams as Spectre moves to end the fight, her awakening as sudden and certain as the tide coming in. Irene pursues the humanoid Seaborn through the Stultifera's corridors, and is nearly overwhelmed before reuniting with Spectre and Scotty, who together corner the creature in the ballroom. The Seaborn does not fight back, but instead retreats to a throne at the far end of the hall, as bells begin to ring and the lights flash dramatically. From behind the throne emerges Captain Alfonso, a half-Seaborn, half-Forte figure who appears far younger than his age and claims to be the Stultifera's legendary captain, speaking with the authority and arrogance of Iberia's golden age. He dismisses Irene and her lantern with contempt, boasting of burning Victoria's ships, paving Salviento's streets with gold, and leading the Tercios across the continent, furious that it took Iberia 60 years to find him. His chief mate Garcia, revealed to be the Seaborn Irene had been chasing, kneels loyally at the throne's side and does not attack. When Alfonso notices Scotty and Spectre, he recoils in sudden recognition and declares that they are far more than ordinary Aegir, calling Scotty the name Ishlar Ma. Meanwhile, Gladia moves through the lower corridors alone, finding the clean and precise wounds on sea terror carcasses and sensing that something else entirely is aboard the ship. Amaya and Alpianus approach the Stultifera together, listening to the bells and debating who is hunter and who is prey and what's unfolding. Amaya notes that Alpianus is beginning to think and speak more like a Seaborn than he realizes, while Alpianus grows tense knowing Gladia is close and that his land-learned skills will not fool her for long. Back at the Eye of Iberia, Dario holds the line alone against an overwhelming tide of sea terrors as Nethersea brand continues to spread, while Geordie watches from above and fights the urge to abandon his post. Spectre, now increasingly lucid, reflects on her returning memories and tells Scotty they will have time to reminisce later, her tone calm and sharp in a way Scotty has rarely heard before. Elysium is revealed to be held captive by the Church of the Deep cultists, who attempt to convert him while Thiago negotiates an uneasy alliance with them to protect Gran Faro from the Inquisition. Elysium rejects their ideology outright, calling them opportunists using religion to justify their grievances, and the cultist quietly concedes he's not entirely wrong. Thiago reports that Monster is bringing back the Nethersea brand faster than it can spread, and that if the standoff drags on, the Inquisition will take the town once the sea terrors holding the Penal Battalion are gone. Meanwhile, the calm town person is revealed to be an Inquisition informant who has turned against Carmen and framed Thiago to protect herself, accepting that her betrayal has condemned him. Aboard the Stultifera, Gladia encounters Amaya deep in the ship's corridors and identifies her immediately as a bishop of the deep like Quintus before her. Amaya summons the Nethersea brand to flood the corridor and retreats without fighting, dropping hints about heralds and evolution before slipping away, leaving Gladia to cut through the small Seaborn she leaves behind and give chase. Captain Alfonso reveals that he has spent the past 60 years aboard the Stultifera hunting seaborne to survive, executing his crew one by one as they lost their humanity rather than allow them to be consumed by the sea, and his arm is transformed into a seaborne limb that constantly tries to override his mind, and he fights it daily to hold on to his identity as an Iberian. He calls Scotty the name Ishlarmla again, which is a name that carries a weight Scotty herself can barely bring herself to acknowledge. When Irene implores Alfonso to return to Iberia, he refuses bitterly, telling her she cannot begin to comprehend what 60 years of isolation and transformation have cost him. He orders them all off his ship before the clock chimes again, threatening to hunt them alongside the seaborne if they remain. Alfonso and his chief mate then dash off into the ship's depths as the screech of seaborne signals the start of a new hunt. Through Garcia's perspective, the full tragedy of the Stultifera is revealed. Alfonso and his chief mate are the last survivors, having spent decades consuming seaborne flesh to stay alive while watching their crewmates transform or take their own lives one by one. Garcia, now fully transformed into a seaborne, still plays old Iberian military songs on a dilapidated piano and places a tender hand on Irene's head when she finds her alone, revealing a retained humanity that shocks the young Inquisitor. Alfonso continues hunting the juvenile seaborne with Garcia at his side, hacking it apart with mechanical determination while the seaborne questions why he hunts without hunger and warns him that consuming its kind has been slowly transforming him. Garcia feels guilt during the fight, sensing it's tearing into its own kin, and Alfonso reassures it that feeling emotion is still proof of humanity. Gladia follows scent trails deep into the ship's interior and finds herself in a space clearly shaped by Briogan's genius, realizing the ship's inexplicable survival is itself the message he left for the Aegir. She holds the key and searches for whatever it is meant to open, knowing the answer to the Aegir's future lies somewhere aboard the vessel. Amaya meets the juvenile seaborne below deck and tends to it, explaining that Alfonso has been sealing nutrients meant for the seaborne's growth by hunting them for food, and that the ship has delayed the emergence of a new ecosystem. She urges the seaborne, which she addresses as a herald, to recover in return, promising that all of Terra will eventually become one with the nest. Alpianus watches the exchange and chooses not to intervene, and Amaya notes that he stopped her from being attacked. The two speak in veiled terms about loyalty, enmity, and what Briogan left behind, with Alpianus growing increasingly difficult to classify as either ally or enemy. He reveals that he has witnessed the deaths of seaborne gods deep in Aegir's territory with his own eyes, and that what he saw shattered everything he believed. He insists that his experience has not broken him, but has given him the resolve to rebuild Aegir's foundations from the ground up. Thiago leads Elysium into a trap for the cultists, with Monster arriving to incinerate the Nethersea brand and the cultists holding them captive, while the double agent reveals herself as the daughter of a Granfaro laborer who spent years undercover to bring the Church of the Deep down. Thiago watches without satisfaction, calling both the cultists and the Inquisition enemies of his home and telling them to witness the same destruction his people once suffered. At the Eye of Iberia, Geordie continues climbing higher as the Nethersea brand creeps up the tower floors, while Dario holds the reef alone below with a corroded sword and depleted arsenal, refusing to look back at the lighthouse and cutting down wave after wave of sea terrors with only his lantern still burning brightly. Aboard the Stultifera, Spectre approaches Alfonso directly and attempts a negotiation that quickly abandons all pretense, declaring the hunters are stronger than him and offering to leave him the seaborne meat after they finish their own hunting. Alfonso puts her at sword point before the juvenile seaborne interrupts by appealing to both of them as kin, and both Alfonso and Spectre immediately turn on it together. Alfonso uses the moment as a test, telling Spectre to prove she is not a seaborne by killing it. Spectre accepts without hesitation, telling Scotty not to interfere and admitting she needs to let off some steam, while Alfonso orders Garcia to stand down and watch. The juvenile seaborne appeals one final time to both of them as kin capable of returning to their kind before the fight begins in earnest. Alfonso reveals more of his and Garcia's history during a quiet moment beforehand, mourning that Garcia's transformation has stolen their voice and lamenting that 60 years passed before anyone came to find them. He speaks of Garcia with fierce protectiveness, refusing to share their former identity or accept any pity, and Garcia, in turn, stays close and sorrowful at his side. In Grand Faro, the cultist torturer explains the Nethersea brand as fragments of a distant divine that will slowly transform land into ocean, confirming Thiago's fear that Grand Faro is simply the next place to be consumed. Thiago accuses everyone around him of being murderers before Monster's arrival turns the tide, and the town's final hours hang on how much longer Dario and the lighthouse can hold. A burning cultist tracks down Thiago in Elysium and stabs Thiago before completing his transformation, but St. Carmen arrives and cuts the cultist down with a single sword stroke, revealing for the first time the full extent of his combat ability after spending the entire crisis relying only on his lantern and arts. Thiago dies in Elysium's arms, spending his last breath demanding to know whether the Aegir taken from Grand Faro decades ago were truly guilty or simply victims of the Inquisition's paranoia. Carmen finally answers after a long silence, confirming that roughly half of the 130 Aegir taken did have ties to the Church of the Deep, and that the one leading them was an Aegir islander the people of Grand Faro had known as Marin. Elysium buries the truth alongside the old mayor, carrying the weight of it as Carmen orders him back to Calicet. Aboard the Stultifera, Spectre and Alfonso work together to drive the juvenile Seaborn through the ship's walls, with Alfonso explaining that he and Garcia have kept the vessel afloat for decades by systematically hunting any Seaborn strong enough to cause structural damage. The Seaborn retreats through the hull but runs directly into Irene, deciding she is not kin and lunging at her with evolved speed and an impenetrable carapace. Garcia intercepts the Seaborn and saves Irene's life, and in a strained, barely human voice tells Irene to run and begs her to not let Alfonso know it's still conscious, revealing that it has hidden its remaining humanity from him all this time to protect him from the grief of knowing. The Seaborn dismisses Garcia as incomplete and drives its fangs into the chief mate, and Irene realizes her blade cannot pierce the creature's body. Remembering Dario's words about casting aside everything she knows and rebuilding her faith from within, Irene raises her hand cannon and unleashes the full force of her lantern's flames, burning through the Seaborn's body with sustained fire until it begins to yield. She declares her verdict aloud, stating that the creature has not sinned by any scriptural measure, but as an Iberian she is passing judgment regardless, ordering it to release Garcia and acknowledging that his condemnation is entirely her own. The Seaborn, overwhelmed by arts it has never encountered before, adapts but cannot stop the barrage. Garcia watches from the side, weeping silently as the flames consume the fight. Amaya spreads the Nethersea brand across the Stultifera's golden halls and confronts Irene, telling her that Dario is dead and the sacrifices all made from Grand Faro's collapse to the Eye of Iberia are insignificant drops in the evolutionary cycle. Irene refuses to accept it, declaring that Dario's death must have had a purpose and that she intends to become that purpose herself before burning the brand with her hand cannon and escaping with Scotty. Spectre stays behind to face Amaya alone, and the two exchange words that hint at a shared and deeply troubling history, with Amaya noting that Spectre was in a coma until the first experiment began. Meanwhile, the juvenile Seaborn pursues Scotty and Irene through the ship's corridors, regenerating rapidly by consuming Sea Terror remains and continuing tasks after Ishlar Mla, even as it fights. Alfonso and Garcia race to finish the months-long hunt, with Garcia dreaming briefly of standing on Iberia's shore beside a younger Alfonso who asks it whose qualities a child of Iberia ought to inherit. Gladia and Alpianus observe the situation from below as the Nethersea brand suddenly accelerates its spread across the ship, and Alpianus warns that the Stultifera will sink. Alpianus presses Gladia with a question about Briogan's key, asking why a genius would design his life's greatest work to activate with anyone's blood and allow it to fall into the hands of a mad knight. He suggests that the Seaborn never needed gods, and that it's only humanity's weakness that drives people to pray to the ocean for comfort, urging Gladia to act before their window closes. The last knight calls Roquiante and rides out to wait for the coming waves, his mind locked in an eternal battle against a tide only he can see. Garcia falls into a rare dream of the Iberian shore, fireworks overhead, a joyful Alfonso beside it, asking which child of Iberia their own child should take after. A memory of warmth and belonging now buried under decades of transformation. On the shore, Cal and Carmen sail towards the Eye of Iberia, with Carmen musing how much will be forgotten and stranded in the years to come, asking what kind of vessel Terra itself would be if it were a ship. Calicet does not answer, and the two press forward in silence as the Eye draws near. Spectre and Amaya share a strange, almost intimate confrontation in the Golden Hall, dancing together as Amaya reveals that Spectre's oripathy is held in check by the seaborn blood within her, and that the clarity she feels near the ocean is not recovery, but a return to her seaborn nature. Spectre listens without flinching, responding that she has already found meaning in what was done to her, comparing herself to a sculptor who gives shape and purpose to dead forms, before striking Amaya and wounding her. Amaya escapes when Alpianus makes his move elsewhere, and Alpianus then reveals himself to Scotty and Glaudia on deck, demonstrating how to kill juvenile seaborn with a single efficient strike, and telling Scotty that her time on land has made her slower and more cautious. The full group converges to finish the seaborn together, with Irene firing her hand cannon to create an opening and Alfonso delivering the killing blow, but the creature survives and tears through the floor in search of Amaya. The seaborn finds her in the engine room badly wounded and unable to heal, and offers itself to her, asking her to consume it so that its kind can continue. Amaya accepts, listening quietly as the seaborn lowers itself at her feet, and in the moment before its death delivers a long monologue on sacrifice, altruism, and the order underlying all life, telling it that it does not need to understand, only act. Glaudia and Alpianus reach the engine room to find Amaya and the seaborn gone, with only vanishing blood trails left behind. Alpianus insists on pursuing alone, but Glaudia follows to maintain discipline, both sensing that more seaborn are converging and that the ship has become the heart of the ocean and all but its name. Scotty learns for the first time that Alpianus survived whatever catastrophe she believed killed him, and that the other companies of hunters did not, a revelation he delivers without softening. Alfonso, still hunting, brushes off the chaos with characteristic bluntness, and the battered group reassembles after the chase ends. On the deck, the last knight sits with Roquiante and waits for the terrible waves he's been expecting, his mind locked on an oncoming storm he can only see. The Stultifera drifts onward, its golden halls scorched and flooded with Nethersea brand, its secrets only partially uncovered. Cal and Carmen arrive at the Eye of Iberia to find Dario dead on his feet, his lantern still burning, having held back the sea terrors alone until his body gave out while the creatures still fear to approach. Carmen mourns briefly before Cal reveals the Stultifera's last signal places it dangerously close to what may be an Aegir city in distress, and she resolves to sail out alone to rescue the hunters. Geordie, left behind at the lighthouse, watches the last boat get swept away by aberrant currents and sea terrors and chooses to take the helm himself rather than hide again, steering out into the open ocean alone. Aboard the Stultifera, the evolved seaborn, now carrying Amaya within it, proves nearly unstoppable, throwing Alpianus overboard, slicing off a cannon with its tail, and striking down Garcia before the combined assault of all three hunters and Alfonso finally tears it apart. Garcia drags the seaborn into the ocean's depths in a death grip, refusing to let it survive even as the sea tries to dissolve its identity, until Alpianus arrives and strikes them both down, telling Garcia it will die a human being. Alfonso stays with his sinking ship, laughing as the flames consume the Stultifera, and ends his own life on his own terms, his final words urging Irene to return to land and sing of his deeds. The Stultifera sinks as Spectre pulls Irene underwater, and through Irene's fading vision, a vast light rises from the ocean floor, hinting at the existence of a gear far below. Carmen weeps silently on shore when he hears Alfonso's final echo across the waves, and Calicet watches him without words. Spectre surfaces and holds Irene tightly, her arms trembling, the weight of everything she had just remembered pressing down on her as she keeps to her promise to Alfonso. Gladia recovers Briogan's travel log from the ship before it goes under, and acknowledges that while the Stultifera is lost, the expedition was not in vain. Alpianus watches Garcia and the Seaborn sink into the abyss together. Locked in an embrace, neither can escape, and does not look away until they're gone. His final words, spoken alone in the dark water, are a warning to Gladia that she must heed what he has tried to tell her before it is too late. Thank you for watching. Please follow my Twitter and Blue Sky for updates, and please check out my other Uma Musume and Azure Lane videos as well. There will be a teaser out tomorrow for next week's character summaries.